Welcome to Bibliophiles Anonymous, episode 34. I'm Denise.
And I'm Jess.
And this week our episode is another Tavern book club book over at the Mallorean Tavern. And we are reading A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness, which I just finished about 20 minutes ago.
I finished it last night.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's nothing like, getting right up to the wire, which... Hey, I'm lucky I was able to finish it at all, to be completely honest. That's a long book.
It really is. And like I said, the first time I read it, I picked it up about 7 o'clock one night and thought, I'll start this before I go to bed because I'm bored. And I figured I'd read for a few hours and fall asleep. Yeah, 7 o'clock the next morning I closed it because I'd finished it.
Yeah, see, the thing is that when you first look at it, it doesn't look like it's that long.
Mm-mm.
But it's actually... well over 500 pages, and it's tiny print.
It really is.
So, yeah, I wasn't expecting it to be that long, so it took me a little bit longer to read, but that's okay. I enjoyed it, and we'll talk about it a little more in just a few minutes. But first, as always, we will talk about anything else that we've been reading this past week.
Well... That was pretty much it for me, but when I finished it, I started reading Shadow of Night, which is the second book in the series.
Okay.
And I'm about a fourth of the way into that.
Okay.
So, hey, at least I'm reading again.
You are. That's a good thing. Well, I've actually read another book this past week. It was a pretty short book, which was kind of nice. I finished it in about 2 days. And it's a book that I had been meaning to pick up for a while for a very specific reason. And it's called The Phantom of Manhattan by Frederick Forsyth.
I can hazard a guess as to why you've been meaning to read this.
Now, okay, here's the deal. Everybody knows I'm a big Phantom of the Opera fan. That's not a secret.
Yes.
So, most people, when they think about that story, they think of the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. It's a big hit on Broadway and London's West End. And a few years ago, Andrew Lloyd Webber and this Frederick Forsyth guy collaborated and wrote kind of a sequel, which was kind of strange because Lloyd Webber's version of this story is one of the few where the Phantom does not die at the end. He kind of disappears, but he's not, killed by an angry mob or anything, which is often the case in some of the other versions. So it's kind of this mysterious, open-ended sort of thing. And so the Lloyd Webber musical, it was called Love Never Dies. And it kind of had mixed reviews because a lot of people were like, how dare you try and add on to this perfect story? You had some of the purists who were really, really upset about it. I'm not a purist. And I actually enjoyed most aspects of it. There were some things that I really hated. The ending being one of them, which I'm not going to go into here because that would just be a major, huge spoiler if anybody wants to see there is a DVD out of the show, or read the book. The ending's, the big part of the ending's the same. And, it was kind of terrible. But, the music was actually really pretty. Some of the best stuff I think he's written, which is one of the reasons why I liked it. But I was curious about the book because... they collaborated on it, and then I'm not sure which came first, if the book came first or the musical came first. I think it was probably the book, though. And so I've been meaning to find it, and the library finally had it. And it was weird. For lack of a better word. It was told through all of these random points of view. Each chapter was a different point of view, and, one of them was a character that's from the original Phantom story, Madame Giry. And then another was from the point of view of this reporter. And another one was the point of view of this person who ends up being the Phantom's kind of business partner. And so it was just all of these random people who are kind of telling pieces of the story. But they kind of felt disconnected quite a bit, which was part of, I don't want to say I didn't like it. I thought it was a very interesting take on the story. Because what they did is they decided that the Phantom leaves France because people are hunting him, and stows away on a ship and comes to America. And he actually ends up in Coney Island in New York, which back then it was really, I mean, it still kind of is, but it was a very carnival atmosphere.
Yeah.
Lots of freak shows, lots of like carnival rides and kind of thrilling sort of midway type shows. And the story is that the Phantom was kind of in his element there because he obviously, after all the stuff he did at the Opera House, he did all these trap doors and hidden passageways and stuff like that. So he was really good at designing and building all of these carnival attractions, and actually becomes quite successful and starts building a new opera house in Manhattan and pays an exorbitant sum of money to get Christine, the girl that he was obsessed with, who's now married. It's 10 years later, and she's now married and has a child, and gets her to come to America to perform there, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens. But I kind of like that because it's, taking place in New York, and you also know that I kind of love the thing about New York, too.
Yeah.
So it's combining two of my favorite things. It's part of why I like it. But
You had to read it.
Yeah, of course I did. But like I said, the book was a similar story. I think the musical probably told it better. But I'm glad I read it. And I did enjoy it. But like I said, it was just kind of weird.
Yeah, I've read things like that before. That I'm at the end, I'm kind of left not sure of how I feel really.
Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like I ought to have enjoyed it more, maybe.
Yeah.
Just because. But then I know a lot of people who are purists who just think that this whole concept is just, evil and should never have, breathed life.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite that far. I mean, I think anybody who takes an older story and tries to put a new spin on it is welcome to do so, and a lot of times they do it with great success. In fact, some of my favorite books are those types of stories that have a kind of a brand new spin on them. And so I think anybody who wants to try can do it, and I'm not, real precious with some of my favorite things. I mean, you should see some of the things I've seen them do to King Arthur Legends. They do all kinds of weird stuff with that. So
yeah.
But anyway, it was only like 200 and something pages, and it was big print, so I was able to fly through that in like 2 days. It was great.
Yeah. Unlike, Discovery of Witches, which is 500 pages and tiny little words.
Yeah. But with both of the books, I'm very glad that I read them, so there you go. So speaking of, let's go ahead and start talking about A Discovery of Witches.
I found this book. I'm the one that suggested it on the Tavern, and I found it. Me and Holly were in Walmart one day, and I saw the cover, which is very pretty and blue, and
the cover's gorgeous.
Has all these alchemical-looking, witchy-looking things on it, and the title, and it just kind of stuck with me. And I read the blurb, and I'm like, okay, I need to read this. So it was the last time the Science Fiction Book Club decided they needed to delete me and re-add me, and I got a bunch of free books out of the deal. I don't know why they keep doing that, but I'm not going to argue with them.
No, I wouldn't.
Because every time they do that, I get the 5 books for $1 thing again. So it's whatever. Anyway, I got it then. I got the book club version, which is smaller than a normal hardback. But anyway, and it sat on my shelf for a while, and it was one of those things that when I picked it up and started reading it, it was just, I was sucked in. I was hooked, and like I said, I started about 7 o'clock one night, and I did not stop until 7 o'clock the next morning because I literally could not find a place to stop. I was so involved in this story and what was happening, and the mystery of this manuscript, and Matthew and Diana, and I was just like, I can't stop. So, I mean, I fell in love with it then. And it's the story of this historian named Diana Bishop, who is descended from Bridget Bishop, who is one of the witches who was killed during the Salem witch trials. One of the more famous ones that was killed during the witch trials. She is her descendant. She is the last of the Bishop witches, and she had a really powerful witch for a mother and a really powerful witch for a father. Well, her parents were killed when she was like 7 years old,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, they
And
were in Africa somewhere.
yeah, they were killed in Africa. And she decided that she never wanted to use magic again. So she grew up and became a historian, and she studies the history of alchemy. And when the book starts, she's in Oxford at the Bodleian Library, and she calls up this manuscript called Ashmole 782. And she immediately knows that there's something magical about it, but she sends it back to the stacks anyway.
Yeah, there was all kinds of things. Like when she put her hands on it, there was just this feeling of magic inside it. And wasn't there also looked like there were some words that were embedded into the paper itself?
Yeah, she says it's palimpsest, which it is a document that's had the ink washed out of it and something else printed on top of it. But she realized that this wasn't the case with this one, that the words were hidden magically.
Right.
Rather than being chemically removed. And she goes and sends it back to the stacks anyway. She's discovered this manuscript that has supposedly been missing for hundreds of years, and she doesn't realize what it is, and not long after that is when she meets Matthew, who, although I want to slap him silly sometimes, I love him.
There's a lot of characters like that for you.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to smack Diana sometimes too, but
I'll just give them all a good smack and be done with it.
Sometimes they need it.
Well, yeah, Matthew is another scholar that's studying at Oxford. But he also happens to be a vampire.
Yeah. Which she knows that when she meets him.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Because, I mean, she can tell the difference between a vampire, a witch, and a daemon, and a human when they look at her. Because it feels different.
Right.
Yeah, we should probably also mention the daemons.
Yeah, the mythology that Deborah Harkness sets up here, there's 4, what do you call them? Races?
Humanoid.
Peoples? I don't know.
They call them creatures.
Well, they don't call humans creatures. The magical ones are creatures. Yeah. But you have witches, which is pretty much what you would expect. They are mostly pagan. They perform magic. You have the vampires, which, again, is what you would mostly expect, except that they can go in the sunlight without any sort of ill effects, apparently.
Yeah, and I like the fact that at one point, when Diana and Matthew are first getting to know each other, he explains that a lot of the vampire mythology that most people ascribe to, there's a grain of truth. There's a reason why these things have been said, like explaining the whole sunlight thing. It's not that they can't go out in the sunlight, it's just in sunlight the humans are more likely to recognize them.
Yeah, for what they are.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like the fact that she takes the time to explain stuff like that.
Yeah. Although, I will have to say, now I know that you absolutely love this book, and I enjoyed it. I didn't dislike it, but I had trouble reading it at times because there were just some places where it would get really, really slow, and I would just start to get a little bit bogged down. And most of that had to do with when she describes things. She goes into really, really great detail.
Yeah, she's kind of verbose.
I will. One in particular example comes to mind right away, and it has to do with when Diana is making dinner for Matthew. She invites him to her place for dinner. She goes for pages and pages where she's trying to decide what to fix. And then she goes for another several pages going into great detail describing exactly what she picked and exactly how she cooked it or didn't cook it because they like their meat extremely rare, almost raw.
Yeah.
And then goes for pages and pages about his reaction to how he was eating the food she prepared, what he did eat, what he didn't eat. And I'm like, okay, this could have been done in, he came over, she fixed him this, and then they talked about other stuff. It was like a solid 15 to 20 pages. It was just about this one dinner that really didn't have a whole lot to do with the main part of the story, except that it was kind of going into more detail about the vampires. But it was a lot of detail about the cooking. And
Yeah.
it was just kind of, if they took out some of that stuff, I swear this book would only be 300 pages long.
She is very verbose, and I the second book is just as bad. I mean, it's long too.
Right.
I mean, I
Well,
started
that's just her
reading it.
style.
Yeah, I mean, look. At least she's not as bad as Robert Jordan. Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, seriously, his books would be about a fourth of the size they are if you took out all of his verbose descriptions about everything.
Yeah.
But
And it wasn't that I didn't like some of it. I mean, a lot of it was really interesting, especially since she's talking about a lot of places that, I mean, I've never been. So I liked all of the descriptions of Oxford and where she was living there and of the library itself, because, I mean, obviously I love a good library.
no,
But yeah, uh, so it wasn't that it was a problem. It was just sometimes it got to be way too much, especially when the thing that she was spending all this time describing really wasn't that important.
yeah.
Like the type of food and how she cooked it. I didn't really care.
But what ultimately ends up happening is Diana and Matthew kind of fall in love. Well, there's no kind of to it, they do.
Oh, they really do.
And he tries to convince her that there's no reason for her not to use her magic, that it's a gift, but she says that she didn't want to use it in her career because she wanted to earn everything she got and not take it because of her magic.
Which is
But,
understandable.
well, yeah, but at the same time, you start finding out that Matthew, he finally tells her what he's researching at Oxford. He takes her to his lab, and you find out that it's the genetics of creatures, because he thinks that the vampires and witches and demons are going extinct. And the reason Ashmole 782 is so important is because it's the book that tells how they were all created.
Right.
And not only that, it talks about their methods of reproduction, which when Matthew and Diana fall in love, you find out, you're told that vampires can't reproduce in the traditional sense. They can only make other vampires. And there's this group called the Congregation who really don't want vampires can't marry witches, and witches can't marry demons, and demons can't marry vampires. They can't mix.
They want everybody to just stay separate.
Yeah.
Well, the thing too was, and this was before we even found out about the congregation, but all of a sudden when they're at the library, just the library keeps filling up with creatures. And there's all these other witches, there's other vampires, there's demons, and it's all because they had heard that the manuscript had made an appearance, and they are all keeping their eyes on Diana, waiting to see if she gets her hands on it again, presumably to take it away from her and do whatever they wanted to do with it. But there's a couple of people in particular. One is that Peter Knox,
Yeah.
who we find out he's part of the congregation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and he's kind of a scary piece of work.
He really is. He's kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the problem is that the demons think that the book should belong to them. The witches think it should belong to them, and the vampires think it should belong to them. Whereas Diana's like, why can't it belong to all of us?
Because that would mean that everybody would have to get along, and we can't have that.
No, because that's just not how things work.
No.
But Matthew's research, he's looking into the genetics of the creatures. And what he has found is he's taken blood from demons and vampires and witches, and what he's found from these witches is that there are genetic markers for different types of powers. For, controlling witch wind and witch fire and witch water, and there's, for time walking and all these different powers. And what he finds when, Diana gives him her blood, or what Marcus finds, is that she has all of the genetic markers for everything, and for some things they've never seen before.
Yeah, her DNA panel is all over the place, and it kind of freaks them out a little bit.
Well, it's not as freaky as when they, okay, and then after Peter Knox pops up and starts sniffing around and getting a little too close, Matthew hauls Diana off to France.
Yeah, to his family's estate.
Yes, which I love his mother. Well, his vampire mother, not his biological mother, obviously. Right. I love her. I mean, she's kind of prickly, but I like that.
She's awesome, though. And
she really is.
And she has a right to be prickly. She's kind of watching this relationship happening between her son and this person that she basically thinks is inferior. Because that's the other thing, too, is like all of the creatures think that their specific race is superior to all of the other ones.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily true. They're just all different. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
Just like anybody else does. But at first she really doesn't want Diana to be there. Doesn't want Matthew involved at all. But after a while, she kind of warms up to the idea.
Yeah, and I love when the dude from the congregation shows up. Dominic shows up, and Matthew asks his mother, "Do I need to leave?" And she just hauls off and slaps him. Like, how dare you even ask that question?
Yeah.
You've made her a declarant now. It's our problem. Because, apparently he has, like, pledged himself to her. As he's taken this vampire pledge and made her, he keeps saying that they're married, and for all intents and purposes, she is his wife.
Well, that's how he sees it anyway.
But he won't sleep with her.
Well, see, I think that's just to raise the tension, because both of them want it so bad, it's starting to get annoying after a while, actually. Well, you just get on with it.
He has other reasons, which you find out in the second book. He has other reasons for making her wait.
Oh, so he's not just a prude?
No, he's not just a prude. He has reasons, and they're actually not bad ones.
Okay.
But
I mean, he could just be old-fashioned too, but that's all well and good. But yeah, I've several times you're just like, oh well, you just get on with it.
Yeah. Well, and you also find out while they're in France that his mother and her handmaiden, I guess you would call her.
Oh, Martha?
Martha, yeah. They think Martha makes Diana drink this tea, which you find out when they leave France and go to her home where her aunts live, is a contraceptive tea.
Yeah.
Even though witches and vampires are not supposed to be able to reproduce that way at all, and especially not with a witch. But they think, ooh, we might want to, yeah.
Just be careful here.
Yeah.
Well, I just have to say before we move on, I want to visit their house in France.
Yes!
Oh my gosh. I mean, basically it's a castle. There. It's a castle. Let's just call it what it is. And it's beautiful, overlooking, this land that they've had in their family for centuries, and this village, and it sounds so gorgeous. And then Matthew's rooms that he has, like, in the tower.
Yes.
Whereas the library, and then the sitting room, and then you go up, like, this spiral, another floor, and there's his bedroom. It's so beautiful. I want to live there.
Of course, I kind of also want her aunt's house.
Well, you get one, I'll get the other, and then we'll just visit.
Okay.
Okay.
Because, when she goes home, when Matthew takes her to her aunt's, because she gets kidnapped while she's at Septours.
Yeah, this is a pretty major thing that happens.
A witch who's connected to the congregation takes her and tortures her to try to pull her magic out of her.
Yeah, because she doesn't believe that the child of these two very powerful witches could possibly be powerless.
Yeah.
It's like there has to be all this untapped power here, and somehow you're hiding it, you're repressing it, so I'm going to find it. And it's just before this, or just before they come to France, actually, that Diana finds out that witches were responsible for killing her parents.
Yeah.
And
Peter Knox and this other witch deliver a photo. They tell her, well, the other witch, Jillian, tells her that it was witches that were responsible for her parents' death. And what it was is they basically gutted her parents like fish.
Yeah, it was really gruesome.
Yeah, because they were, they were trying to figure out what kind of power they had. And they did this to try to convince the congregation that the power that they were sensing, that they were looking for, was her father's power instead of Diana's. But it was really Diana's. So what they had done before they left on this trip to Africa was they spellbound her.
Right.
They limited her powers and tied it into need. She could use them if she needed them, but not when she wanted them.
Which is part of the reason why it was easy for her to decide to turn her back on it, because she hadn't really used it. Like most witches, if they wanted to do something, they could just summon up the power, cast the spell, or however they wanted to do it, right, and just take care of it. But since she didn't really have that, then it was easy for her to turn her back on it and pretend like it didn't exist, when the truth of the matter was it existed quite a bit, and it had been kind of bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
And that's why she had had to kind of be athletic, because that helped kind of tamp everything back down. Like she would go out and row out on the river, and she did a lot of yoga that kind of helped her, and running, and that kind of helped her stay grounded. But if she didn't do that, it would kind of build up, and she thought that it was a buildup of adrenaline. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't actually the case. That was just an excuse that her mom came up with to explain what was happening to her physically.
Well, after she's, kidnapped and she's being tortured, she's visited by the ghosts of her parents. And
can I just tell you how much I love, number one, that there are ghosts in this world at all, and number two, just how they are described and how they kind of work. I love how she did that. And her mother tells her the fairy tale that she's been telling her since she was a little girl, which, as it turns out, was not a fairy tale. Because her mother had foresight, and she had seen Matthew in Diana's future, and she had seen what was going to happen to her and Diana's father, and she gave her the key to undoing the spellbinding herself with this story. So once she's rescued, they decide that she needs to learn how to use her magic. So they pack up and go see Sarah and Emily. Now, Sarah is Diana's aunt.
Yeah, and Emily is her girlfriend.
Right.
And they raised Diana after her parents were killed.
And they live in a magic house.
Yes, which I very much want. It makes new rooms when there's more people coming to visit.
It's trying to be helpful.
And it opens and closes doors and gives them things, and it's really cool, and I want to live there.
Yeah, the house is basically another character. It has its own thoughts and opinions, and it makes those opinions known whether you want to know them or not. And I love that house too. Yeah, so one of us has to get the house in France, and the other one of us has to get the house that the witches live in, and then we can just visit each other back and forth.
Or we can swap every 6 months.
Oh, that works too. That'd be fun. That'd be fun.
They go there, and, her aunts get to know Matthew. They've been very anxious about him, and apparently Emily knew about Diana being spellbound, even though Sarah didn't.
Well, and Sarah had also been, well, both of them really, but Sarah more so, had been really, really worried about Diana because she has these visions. And every time something was happening with Diana, she could sense it, or she saw a vision of it. And she kept trying to get in contact with Diana, and Diana knew she was about to get a lecture, so she wouldn't call back. And so by the time they finally showed up, Sarah was about ready to smack them both upside the head.
Yeah.
Which I can't blame her, actually.
No. Which, after they'd been there a while, they kind of got used to the idea of Matthew, but then other people started turning up. Like Marcus, which is Matthew's son. He made him a vampire. And Matthew's assistant, Miriam.
And both of them work in the genetics lab with with Matthew as well.
Right. And the reason they show up is because they found something else in Diana's genetic makeup. They find out she's a chimera, which is, this actually happens. I've seen it on TV and I've looked it up online. People who have two sets of DNA in their bodies. Like their hair and nails may carry one set and then their skin cells will carry another.
Okay.
It happens a lot. The way they explain it in the book is absorbed twin syndrome. Basically, very, very early on, she had a twin, a fraternal twin, and it wasn't viable, so her body absorbed the genetic material of the twin.
Yeah, that sort of thing, actually, I don't know about the genetic material absorption, how exactly all that works, but that's actually fairly common. That's a real thing.
Well, if you ever see anybody who has two different colored eyes, like one green and one blue, then usually they're a chimera.
Okay.
Because that's what happened. Well, not only, see, they were surprised at how many genetic markers she had for all of these witchy powers when they originally ran her DNA. Well, when they ran it again with this other DNA that they found on her, they find out she's got even more powers. And that's where the time walking thing comes in. Because the congregation is so dead set against this Matthew and Diana thing, and because all these people are looking for Ashmole 782, and because Diana needs to learn how to use her powers, they decide, well, we're just going to go back to 1590.
Of course they are.
And that's kind of, well, and also you have these two Daemons show up, one of whose mother is part of the congregation and sent them to Diana to help them. The girl's parents were a witch, she's a Daemon, and she's pregnant with a baby that's going to be a witch.
And everybody's trying to kind of figure out how that is even possible.
Yeah. So Matthew and Diana decide that they're going to go back in time. They're going to go to 1590. She's going to try to find a witch then, which she doesn't know they're going to 1590, but they decide they're going to go back and find a witch to teach her how to use her powers and see what they can find out about Ashmole 782. And that's kind of where the book ends. It's Halloween, and Diana carries herself and Matthew back in time to 1590.
And they're going to meet up with Christopher Marlowe.
Yes.
Who is
Sir Walter Raleigh and Henry, the Earl of Northumberland, and, lots of people. I'm pretty sure William Shakespeare is even mentioned in the second book, too. But I have to say...
He says that he knew Shakespeare, so that's... Or will,
I have to say, one of my favorite lines in this book is when the house gives Diana a package from her mother that her mother gave to the house when Diana, right before they left going to Africa. It has one of the pages from Ashmole 782. It has a illustration, which is called a chemical wedding. And the thing about alchemy is that they would use illustrations of people to represent these chemical reactions. And a chemical wedding is the combination of two materials. But this illustration of chemical wedding seems to represent Matthew and Diana. And they're trying to figure out what these other words could be on the page and some of the secrets of this book. And I love when Diana says, when not lying in wait in dark corners, Matthew joined Sarah and Marcus in the most unholy trio of potion brewers since Shakespeare put three witches around a cauldron. Because they were in the still room brewing potions trying to figure out, something about this manuscript. And I love that line. I love it. It's not as good as the one in the second book when she says something about she doesn't care what Will Shakespeare is doing, will be doing, or has done, as long as he is not currently in the Great Hall. This is after they're back in 1590,
Right.
It was pretty funny because he's talking about these people, and she's just freaking out because, she studied these people. She's a historian. And he's just casually talking about them, and she's like, oh my God.
Well, that's understandable, because I would probably react the same way, being the English major that I was. But the thing about that page is very early on, as soon as in the beginning of the book, when Diana has the manuscript for the first time, she sees that some pages are missing. And this is 3 of them, because she can see the, little tiny edges that are left in the book. And at first, this is before she knows that there's anything strange or weird about the manuscript. She doesn't really think anything about it. And it's just one of those little tiny details that an author will just sort of drop in there that don't seem to be that important. I mean, it's a really, really, really old book. You don't think that something got torn at one point or another. It's perfectly plausible.
Yeah.
But then you find out at the end that one of these pages is in the hands of Diana and the witches. And so that leads them to suspect that the vampires have one and the Daemons have one.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have no idea what's on these pages, but they think that it's going to be something that they think it's going to be something that can be used against them, or that's going to help them in some way.
They think that it's going to be the key to figuring out how they can survive and adapt. And what I think, and this is sort of conjecture from reading the first and second book, is I think that it's going to, one, explain where they all came from. It's going to be the origins of all of these species, including humans. I think it's going to show that they didn't originally start out as different species.
But they have common ancestors.
Yeah, I think it's going to show that they all have common ancestors, and I think it's going to show them how to reproduce with one another in the end. But see, at the end of the second book, they still don't actually have Ashmole 782. So I really wish you would hurry up and write book 3.
So book 2 is really good, huh?
Book 2 is good. Book 2 takes place almost completely in 1590.
Okay.
And you meet several queens. Well, not really several. You meet the Queen of England, and you meet, Kit Marlowe and Sir Walter Raleigh and all of these people. But you also, it's mentioned in these books, Matthew's father, the vampire that created him, is dead. And he was tortured by Nazi witches, apparently. Well, when they go back to 1590, he's still alive.
And I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And they end up at Sept-Tours again.
Mm-hmm.
With Felipe. And he's one of those characters that he kind of starts off, you don't really want to like him, but you can't really help it.
Okay.
So, I mean, the second one is really, really good. And it shows us a completely different side of Matthew.
Well, yeah, because that's something that I think it was Marcus that said when they go back in time that Matthew was going to be different.
Yeah, he's not going to be the same Matthew.
Yeah, and Diana's like, well, he's going to be Matthew, and Marcus is like, but he's not going to be the same Matthew.
Right.
And that's something that I didn't quite get, because they do some smaller time walking just so that they can get the hang of it. When they go back in time, does the version of them at that time period go away?
Yeah, it kind of, she doesn't really explain how it works, but they kind of go into, okay, you know how in the Belgariad, when Garion turns into a wolf, all of his sword and his clothes and everything are still there, but they're not?
Right.
I think that's kind of where 1590 Matthew went.
Okay.
Because he was sitting in a tavern and he just disappeared when the other one showed up.
So you can't have 2 of them at the same time.
Right. The universe won't let that happen because, that would rip the space-time continuum in half.
Well, that's convenient for the universe to help us out like that.
Yeah. So, he's sitting in a tavern on his way to one place. Well, he crops up in the old lodge where he had just left and everybody thought he was going to be gone for a while. And he was like, oh no, we had to come back. And, they're trying really hard to explain how this happened and to explain Diana, because everybody's like, Matthew, you hate witches. Why did you marry one? And, her speech patterns are completely different, because even though, in 1590 England, they spoke English,
it's not the same English.
No, it didn't sound the same. The speech patterns were different. Not just the accent, but she said something about, her sentences would go up when they were supposed to go down. So I mean, it was just a completely different set of speech patterns. So she's trying to learn how to act and behave as a woman in 1590, and it's kind of befuddling for her at first.
Oh, I'll bet.
So I mean, it's really good. The second one is, and she needs to hurry up and write the third one because I want to know what's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I love the book. I love the woman that wrote them, Deborah Harkness. She actually is a historian. I believe she did actually study at Oxford.
Okay.
So I mean, a lot of her historical data, about how life was in 1590 and stuff like, she's actually, correct.
She studied that.
Right. So, but she has spun a thread of fiction through it, and she does it really well. She makes it believable,
Right.
which to me is the mark of a good author. If you can take, something that's factual and weave fiction through it and make it believable, then you're good at what you do.
Oh, definitely.
Which is why I don't understand all these people getting up in arms over the whole Dan Brown thing. Let's debunk Dan Brown, even though he says at the beginning of his books, these are works of fiction. How do you debunk fiction?
You have to be very, very careful.
He doesn't claim that his work is the truth. He says it's a work of fiction. And I'm like, the fact that he can take these historical events and weave this thread of complete and utter fantasy through it and make it that believable, to me is just a sign that he's a good author.
Yeah.
He's not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. He's not trying to start a religious movement. He's just trying to entertain people.
And that's
kind of how, yeah, I want to read his new one too.
Oh, I saw he has a new one out.
Yeah, it's another Robert Langdon book, and I really want to read it. But, Deborah Harkness is the same way. She takes this thread of fantasy, of the fantastic, witches and vampires and demons, and weaves it into these historical things. And, she makes Kit Marlowe. Kit Marlowe is a demon, whatever.
Right. Yeah, they mention it. Human. And he's the one, for anybody who doesn't know who he is, he's the one that wrote Faust. Anybody's heard of Faust? That's the story of a man who sells his soul to the devil.
Yeah.
Very famous story. There's been several different versions of it, but Marlowe wrote one of the first ones.
Yeah, he did. And that's the book that he gave to Matthew.
Right.
But she's done a very good job of it. I mean, she sucked me in. The first time I read it, it was one of those books that I literally could not put down because I could not find a place where I was comfortable stopping because it's like, I want to know what's going on. Like with the whole DNA thing and Ashmole 782, and I'm like, I want to know. Come on, you got to explain this.
Well, see, and that was one of the things that I did enjoy about it, was the way that it was, like you were saying, it was blending in this historical stuff with this fictional thread that's kind of woven throughout there. But for me, it was more, you have the fantasy, you have the history, and you have the science. And it's all woven together. I mean, it's one thing to take history and fantasy and kind of put them together, and because that's done fairly often, and it's, I don't want to say it's not hard, because any kind of writing is hard, but I think it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
But to take fantasy and history and science, I mean, all we need to do is throw religion in there, and then we'd have like the full deck. But throwing that scientific stuff in there with the DNA and trying to see exactly how. I love the fact that magical powers and traits show up in your DNA.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. Everything else is in there.
Well, too, and you think about our DNA, if you read anything about, these scientists that study our DNA, there's a lot of markers in our DNA that are not used.
Right.
That are remnants of things that used to be part of our makeup. I think they call it trash DNA at some point in the book, but it makes sense because it's like those once served some purpose.
Right.
Why not that we used to have these magical powers? There used to be witches and vampires and things that use these markers that we don't use anymore.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting. And again, a very believable, plausible way to meld all of those things together.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite characters is Marcus.
Yeah, I like Marcus.
I think and it's hard to call a vampire like a young pup, but he's kind of like the young pup of the vampires. You know,
Yeah.
he's Matthew's son. He turned him, but he's just at first he's very happy-go-lucky and he has no problem with Diana at all. He likes her. He thinks that she's really cool and uh, is willing to help with all of the scientific study with her DNA and all of that. But by the end of this book, though, I'm really worried about Marcus because we didn't even really talk about the Knights of Lazarus.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't.
It's
Okay.
this let's see how to describe it.
Okay, you've heard of the Knights Templar?
Yeah.
The Knights of Lazarus kind of absorbed the Knights Templar, according to the history in this book. Diana finds the ledgers in Matthew's study that shows where Jacques de Molay gave the Knights of Lazarus all of the Templars' money. They're a chivalrous order of knights, kind of like the Templars, but their main job is that they defend those who can't defend themselves.
Right.
And Matthew's the head of this order.
Which really puts it more in perspective because, this is something that dates back to the Crusades.
Well,
and before
that even, because they predated the Templars.
Yeah. So
because
when you think that's how old Matthew is.
Well, he's 1,500 years old.
I know, but you can say that, and with it just being a number, it's hard really to put it in perspective. But when you talk about all of the different things that he's been through and seen, and like when he was talking about being in Jerusalem several times, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You've lived hundreds of lifetimes over again. It's just really remarkable.
And apparently, modern day Knights of Lazarus, there's only 9 of them.
Right.
And, when Matthew and Diana decide to return to the past, or go to the past, whatever, he has to make Marcus the head, the Grand Master. And Marcus doesn't want it.
No.
He's like, I ordered you to return and take back your knights. Which made me giggle. He's like, you better come back and take them away from me because I'll make a mess of things.
Oh, well, and that was another thing, too, was as they were going through and getting ready to do the time walking, another character that I really, 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 really like is Hamish.
Yes.
Who is Matthew's demon friend. And they've been friends for a long time, and it turns out he's in the Knights of Lazarus too, which was apparently a no-no. Which was apparently a no-no because he was a demon and the Knights were supposed to be vampires. But
yeah.
So everybody was kind of like, you made him a knight? Say what? Really?
And then he makes Nathaniel one.
Yeah. Because the two people who had arrived at the end was Nathaniel and Sophie. That's the couple, the one who's pregnant. She's a demon who came from a witch, and now she's pregnant with a witch. And they're all trying to still figure out how the heck that's going on. So now they have this group that's made up of witches and vampires and demons that is willing and able to go confront the congregation.
Yeah, they're kind of the anti-congregation. They call themselves the conventicle.
Yeah. And so there's 3 of each race. Humans just get left out of everything. Let's face it, we're boring.
Well, that's because we're kind of oblivious to all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like Matthew says, humans don't want to believe, so they convince themselves that it's not really there.
Hey, this human wants to believe.
Yeah, this one does too.
Yeah. So
sign me up.
I'm perfectly fine with that. But when Hamish comes over there, he's talking about Diana's will and making sure that the house is taken care of, because they're basically preparing for the fact that Matthew and Diana are never coming back. And that just kind of brought home exactly how serious it is what they're trying to do, especially since Diana is not very practiced at it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're taking a really big chance here because, her aunts tell her, well, when you were a kid, you were a time walker. You did it all the time. But that was before she was spellbound. So they're taking a huge risk in counting on the fact that Diana can take them back to where they need to go and when they need to go and do it right.
Right. Ending up in the right place without killing themselves in the process.
Yeah.
So there's just all these little complexities that were all kind of tied and woven together. That was one of the things that made this book good.
Yeah, I mean, and then the second one is just as good. I mean, there's a lot going on there too, and you do get to see a lot more of Matthew's history and learn a lot more about him because I mean, Diana, let's face it, compared to Matthew especially, she's a baby.
Oh yeah.
She doesn't have a whole lot of history to learn about. Matthew has 1,500 years that we know he was married and had a son that died because of some kind of disease, and when they go back to Septours and Philippe is alive, and you find out a lot more about Matthew, which I like because he was kind of standoffish and at arm's length throughout this first book.
Well, I think probably for good reason.
Well, yeah, because I mean, he says he's afraid to let Diana know a lot about him because how could she possibly love him if she knew the things that he had done, yada, yada, yada.
Oh, he's one of those.
Yeah, which, thankfully, he finally gets over that.
Well,
but yeah, I really, really enjoyed the book.
I did too. Like I said, there were a couple things here and there that kind of got on my nerves, but for the most part, I really did enjoy it. And I do want to read the second one at some point. I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon, just because I've got a whole ton of other things I need to read first. But it's definitely going on the list of series that I intend to finish.
Well, I went ahead and started it after I finished The Discovery of Witches because the first time I read Shadow of Night, it had been so long since I had read Discovery of Witches that I'm sure there's some little things that tie together that I didn't pick up on.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I went ahead and started it last night when I finished Discovery of Witches, because I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and read it while, since I have just read this one.
When it's still fresh in your mind.
Yeah, and while it's fresh in my mind and see, how these things tie together, remembering this stuff freshly. So like I said, I'm about a quarter of the way through it. Hopefully in a day or two I'll be done with it. But she needs to hurry up and write book 3.
You've said that a couple times now. You're not too impatient, are you?
Patience is not one of my virtues.
I'm looking on Goodreads, and it's weird because they show book 3, and it says that there's a publication date of 2013, but it also still says that it's untitled.
Yeah, it was only a couple of months before before she released the title of Shadow of Night.
So it seems like if it was going to be coming out this year that we would already have a title for it.
Well, like I said, she did that with Shadow of Night. It was like Shadow of Night came out last May.
Okay.
And I don't think she announced the title until like March.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe it's coming out later this year then. Because it does say that it's a 2013 publication date.
Well, I hope so, because it's been a year. I want book 3.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything other than just that it doesn't give a month or a date or anything like that. It just says 2013. So I'll keep my fingers crossed for us.
Yes, because I really want book 3. I want to know how she's going to tie all this up.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of tying it up, I think that's probably going to do it for our discussion for tonight.
Yeah, if for no other reason than Skype is being a brat.
Yeah. We're going to edit it so it sounds like nice and smooth, but
And connected.
yeah, it's punked out on us, what, 3 times tonight so far?
Twice.
Oh, was it just twice? Oh.
Yeah, I think twice. Either way, it's being a brat.
Yeah, so we're going to wrap things up before Skype decides to kick us off again.
Yes, and I'm hungry, so.
Oh, well, then by all means, let's go ahead and get this over with. So, if you have read this book and you want somebody to talk it over with, the book club discussion thread over at the Mallorean Tavern is open. So you can go over there. The web address for the Mallorean Tavern is www.maltavern.com. And we'll also put a link directly to the discussion thread in the show notes for this episode, so you can just click on it and head right over there. If you want to discuss it with us, or if you have any other comments or feedback or topic suggestions or book recommendations or just anything you want to let us know, there's a couple different ways that you can contact us. You can email us, and we're at bibliophiles.podcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter. We are at BibAnonPodcast, and we get on there and we follow several different authors, and so we'll sometimes retweet things that they're talking about, or a couple times we've gotten into some interesting conversations with some of them. So follow us on Twitter. You never really know what you're going to find over there. And
Yeah.
We also always update Twitter as soon as the new episodes are out, so you would find out about it first over there. And as always, you can find us at our official website, which is www.bibliophiles-anonymous.com.
Yep.
And just a reminder, next week we will not have a show. We are taking Memorial Day weekend off, so I can go to New York City. And so we will not be here. So go and do something fun for the holiday weekend. And we will be back the following week talking about something. We don't know what yet. We'll figure it out at some point.
Yeah.
But
Between them.
yeah, so like I said, if you want us to talk about something specific, let us know, because we would be glad to entertain all and every suggestion.
Yep.
So I think that's going to do it for this episode.
I think they will.
Okay, so until next time, thanks for listening, and we will see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.